So it's time for my June month-end wrap-up. That is to say, where I discuss all of the books that I read during the second half of June. So stick around to see what I've been up to. Hey friends, Roger here, and welcome to my channel, Rogers Reads. So today I'm doing my June month-end wrap-up. As always, I divide my wrap-ups into two parts, one about the middle of the month and one at the end of the month. Of course, I was incredibly late with the both of them this month. And as always, I put a link to each of these books as well as the time when I discuss the book in the description below, so you can jump to a specific book if you are so inclined. So the first book that I read was entitled Magic for Liars, and this is written by Gailey. So Magic for Liars opens up with a gruesome death of Sylvia Capley, a beloved professor at the Osthorne Academy for Young Mages. So the victim was found in the library, split lengthwise in half. So the magical authorities ruled the death an accident, but the headmistress of the academy thinks, or is pretty sure, that Sylvia was murdered. So the headmistress contacts a clever private detective named Ivy Gamble to investigate. Now, Ivy has a connection to the Magical Academy because her twin sister is also a professor there. Her name was Tabitha. So the kicker here is that Tabitha has magic, whereas Ivy does not, which has been a kind of a point of contention between the estranged sisters, and there's plenty of tension and resentment between the two of them. So Ivy's not all that keen on getting involved with the Magical Academy, but the massive amount of cash that she's offered helps to convince her, as well as the idea of investigating a real live murder case, which I do believe is her first. So Ivy then ends up moving to the academy, actually staying in the deceased person's apartment until she solves the case. She interviews students, faculty, and even ends up reconnecting with her sister. So soon the puzzle pieces slowly begin to fall into place, and Ivy gets closer and closer to uncovering the killer. And as she discovers in the process, the murder motive is a lot more complicated and multi-layered than everyone had initially thought. It was interesting how Ivy found herself thrust into this magical world, a world she both resented and dreamed of being a part of for her entire life. So we got to witness her struggle as she tried to reconcile these conflicting feelings. I also enjoyed seeing a magical world from the eyes of a non-magical person, especially when she tried to pretend to understand the incomprehensible magical jargon. Now, it's worth mentioning that through it all, Ivy pretends to be magical herself, pretty much lying to everyone that she comes in contact with, hence the title, Magic for Liars. She also makes some questionable decisions during the investigation because of the intense, almost desperate need and desire to belong. Also riveting was the examination of magical teenagers as seen through the point of view of an outsider, as Ivy involves herself in high school drama of hierarchies, teenage angst, teen politics, and secrets, and all of which brings her closer to solving the murder. So the story had a real detective noir feel to it, which was a lot of fun, though I might have preferred if the author had left out the alcoholic/drunken PI stereotype. The fact that Ivy had a constant hangover at the beginning of every new section became a little bit tiring after a while. Now, that being said, the story is definitely not Hogwarts, as it's more of a character-driven story rather than a plot-driven one. It's also a darker story, and though it does revolve around high school students, it's definitely not a tale for children. It was sometimes painful being in Ivy's head, as she's pretty much an emotional mess. Still, this was a fun, noir-styled whodunit, and I thought that the mystery aspect and the writing were well done. Now, the characters were all pretty much convincing to me and felt like people that you might meet in your everyday life. Now, my only niggle with the book is that it ended a bit abruptly to me, and I felt that because of it, the story lacked closure, and those of you who know me know that I'm a closure junkie. But for the most part, Magic for Liars was an engrossing read with a tough-as-nails main character and an intriguing mystery to solve. Also, a huge thank you to the author and to Tom Doherty Associates for providing me with a review copy of this book. So the next book that I read this month was entitled Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. Now, I actually got this book from the library, so I had to bring it back, so I don't have a physical copy, but I'll put the cover up above. So I tried to get this book from the library for the Read Your Gaze readathon because it had a bisexual character in it, which was one of the challenges. But it didn't come in until after the readathon was over. But I still read it, and all I can say is, wow. This ended up being an utterly delightful and heartwarming romantic comedy. So the story revolves around the fictional Democratic presidential first family, with the president being President Ellen Claremont, who supposedly won in the 2016 election. No comment. So the story follows the first son, Alex Claremont Diaz, and his nemesis, Prince Henry of Wales. So after an incident/confrontation at the royal wedding involving Henry and Alex, photos surface of their altercation, garnering international attention and in the process threatening American and British relations. So thrust in the midst of a PR nightmare, the presidential administration comes up with a plan for damage control, staging a fake friendship between Alex and Henry. So what this involves is them attending functions together, visiting each other in their respective countries, and basically being seen as much as possible in the other's company, in an attempt to convince the world that they are actually the best of friends rather than the enemies that they are in real life. So of course we can guess what happens. Alex begins to discover that he might be bisexual, and in so doing, the two of them, Henry and Alex, begin to fall in love and end up in a clandestine relationship. Now the pressure is on to keep the romance a secret, especially since Alex's mom is kicking off her election bid and Henry across the pond is expected to uphold his own duties of the throne. So it was so much fun journeying along with Henry and Alex as they struggle with their feelings for each other, all the while trying to project to the world the proper image of the son of a world leader. That, along with the knowledge that a homosexual relationship between the USA president's son and the English prince would have, shall we say, enormous political consequences. Now, there are also a lot of other things going on here beneath the surface, rendering the story even more compelling. You know, one of my favorite tropes is the enemies to lovers trope, and I thought that this one was exceptionally well done in this novel. But what really caused me to love this novel was the banter and the one-liners between the two characters. Now, given that most of the time they were apart, they had to resort to texting and emails to communicate, and their dialogue with each other was laugh out loud funny. As well as incredibly moving, poetic even. There was this fantastic chemistry between Alex and Henry, and that, coupled with the banter, elevated this book from the level of good to fantastic for me. I equally love the other characters in the novel, as they were all so well drawn and so realistic. What I also liked about this book was the fact that the romance was a very slow burn, with our couple enjoying a history of good times before trouble hit. And yes, trouble does hit. You know, in some novels, something horrible and terrible happens to the main character pretty much in every chapter, which, I find exhausting sometimes. I mean, I do love conflict, but again, everything in moderation. But here we're giving a good portion of the book for our guys to get to know each other, to fall deeper in love, and to experience a lengthy stretch of happy and mostly carefree times. So I thought that this was actually quite a brilliant plot device, because by the time something bad does happen to our characters, the reader is more invested in the outcome, because by this point we care deeply about our two guys by this point. Now, I will mention that though the romance is the main focus of the story, there is a good amount of U.S. politics in this story. But I thought it was well done, however, and really didn't take away from the main focus of the novel, which is the relationship between Henry and Alex and the obstacles they had to face. So all in all, this was a super sweet, feel-good romance with a diverse group of lovable characters and a gripping, heartfelt story with a good sprinkling of drama. And I ended up giving this book 5 unequivocal stars. So the next book that I read was entitled These Witches Don't Burn. And this is also a book from the library, which I had to bring back. So I couldn't wait to get my hands on this book. When I heard it was not only about witches, one thing I love reading about, but also queer witches, which was an extra plus in my book. So the story follows Hannah, who lives in Salem, Massachusetts, and who is an elemental witch, having the power to control earth, air, fire, and water. Now, she has to keep her magic a secret from non-witches, otherwise the council, namely her grandmother, the high priest, could strip her of her powers. So we learned right off the bat that Hannah has just broken up with her ex-girlfriend Veronica, who is also a witch and belongs to the same coven as Hannah. But things change for Hannah when someone performs a horrific blood ritual at the end of the year high school bonfire. And Hannah is certain that it's the work of a dreaded blood witch, the most terrifying and deadliest of all witches. The others in her coven aren't convinced, however, so now it's up to Hannah to convince her coven before the blood witch can strike again. So in order to do so, Hannah needs to team up with Veronica, her ex, who is trying to also win Hannah back in the process. And then things get even more complicated when Hannah meets a cute new girl in town named Morgan. But then things take a turn when Hannah's own coven falls under attack. So I was really hoping to love this book, but sadly it just wasn't for me. Now, I really enjoyed the first part of the story. It really hooked me right in. I thought it was fast-paced and fun with plenty of action. But the second half of the book, however, became really, really dark, which I have to admit kind of surprised me. I actually thought this was going to be like a fun, lighthearted, witchy novel, as hinted at by the cover, which seemed to be kind of playful. But it actually ended up being quite dramatic with a definite dark tone to it. Now, I don't mind darker stories. I actually quite enjoy them. I was just kind of surprised by the abrupt change in tone, especially when I was expecting a fun, maybe quirky adventure with the witchy romance. But one thing that did bother me, however, was the toxic ex-girlfriend Veronica. There was definitely an unhealthy relationship dynamic between her and Hannah, and I actually found Veronica to be on the emotionally abusive side. So that was kind of annoying in my opinion. I think that the author might have gone a little bit too far with her character, especially with all the horrid things that she did to Hannah during the story. There also wasn't a hell of a lot of magic in the story, which was kind of disappointing given that it was a book about witches after all. Another thing that didn't jive with me was the writing style. I don't know, it felt choppy and jarring, and I just didn't feel that it flowed very well. But what really left a bad taste in my mouth about this story was that the novel ended on a friggin' cliffhanger. When I closed the last page of the book, the first thought that popped in my head was, well, that was a colossal waste of time. You know, I had no idea that this was the start of a series, the first book in the series. There was no mention of it on the blurb or the book cover or any hint that this was book one. So those of you who followed me for a while know my opinion on cliffhangers, so I won't belabor that. Just know that I hate them. So given that the author forgot to finish the book and only gave us part of a story here, I ended up giving this book 2 stars, and I will not be continuing on with this series. So this book has received a lot of hype, and many people really enjoyed it, so I'm definitely in the minority here. So if you like witchy stories and if you're looking to start a new series, then you may enjoy this book more than I did, so you might want to check it out. So the next book that I read was entitled Brave Face by Shaun Hutchinson. Now, I'm a huge fan of Shaun Hutchinson, a popular YA author, and I do believe I've read pretty much of everything he's written, so I was really excited to read his memoir. I actually listened to his memoir, especially when I learned that he was going to be reading it himself, and I am so glad that I consumed it this way. It was great hearing Shaun read his own words. So, you know, I find it difficult to comment on someone's memoir as these are so deeply personal, especially in the case of this one. So in this book, Shaun is a young gay kid confused and struggling to accept who he is and how he fits into his world. A world he sees as more or less hostile toward gay people. Now, depression doesn't help matters as we journey along with Shaun as he begins to spiral downward. So luckily, with the help of others, he's able to pull himself out and find acceptance and manage his depression. So really, what we have here is a powerful and moving memoir of a gay teen. So this brutally honest book tackles some pretty intense topics such as depression, sex, suicide, self-loathing, and self-harm. And Shaun even warns several times throughout the book that parts of it may be triggering for some people. He usually warns which places in the book that you might want to skip over and where it's safe to continue on if you're triggered by certain things. So I ended up really enjoying this book, though I don't know if enjoying is the right term for such a heavy-hitting memoir like this one. I will say that I admire Shaun's courage in publishing such a personal account of his life, which will no doubt help gay or questioning teens who read it. So the book is ultimately hopeful and ends on an upbeat note as we journey with Shaun on his path of recovery. You know, I think that many of us can relate to a lot of the experiences that Shaun went through. So for some of us, his is no doubt a highly relatable story. I know it was for me at least. Now, I don't want to say that this book is important, as a term has turned into such a cliche these days, with everybody saying this book or that book is important. But I will say that Brave Face is well worth the read, especially for any queer teen out there who's struggling with their identity, or actually for anyone living with mental health issues or struggling with who they are. I think that this will be a book that many people will be able to relate to, and I'm really glad I read it. And I ended up giving it 5 stars. So the last book that I read during the second half of the month was entitled Recursion by Blake Crouch. So this was one of the Book of the Month Club selections last month, and when I heard that this book was about an affliction that drove people mad with memories of a life they never lived, I snatched it right up. For those of you who follow my channel for a while, you know that I love books about memory and timelines, and this one was right up my alley. Now, I wasn't familiar with Blake Crouch, the author of the book. Then I learned that he penned the Wayward Pines trilogy, which was turned into a television series that I did see. He's also the author of Dark Matter, which I haven't read, but I've heard a lot of good things about. So these tidbits made me even all the more excited to read this book. So this affliction is called false memory syndrome and leads up to a lot of people committing suicide as a result. So the story starts out with the dual timelines of two people, Barry Sutton, a New York City cop whose teenage daughter was killed years earlier, and Helena Smith, a neuroscientist who is trying to find a way to restore memories in Alzheimer's patients. So they are both trying to figure out what in the hell is going on with this false memory syndrome, and their paths and stories cross and converge. Now, I recommend going into this book knowing as little as possible about it, so I am not going to say too much more. Now, I will say that in the search for the truth about what's going on, Barry and Helena discover that this whole memory thing is causing society to unravel as it becomes increasingly difficult for people to discern these so-called false memories from reality. So this is a story about preserving memories and then taking those memories to shift our reality. So that being said, this is really a mind-bending sci-fi story, the kind that I typically love. It's not a sci-fi story about spaceships or aliens or planets, but rather it's about memories and our understanding of reality. So this is both, I'd say, a character-driven story and a plot-driven one with plenty of action, which kept me glued to the page. It's one of those heart-in-your-throat kind of stories, addicting, intense, and one hell of a wild ride. It's what happens when Pandora's box is flung wide open. I love this novel so much that I'd probably say that it's my favorite novel of the year thus far. What I loved about it was that it was so twisty that you never knew in what direction it was going to head next. It's thought-provoking, fast-paced, with a mind-blowing plot, super complex characters, and is unput-downable. At least it was for me. So I definitely plan on reading a lot more by this author, and I gave this one 5 stars. So if this sounds like the type of story you'd enjoy, you definitely might want to pick up Recursion, because this is a great read. So how about you? Did you read anything good in June? Let me know in the comments. And I think that about does it. As always, I thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support. And if you like this video, I really appreciate if you click the like button below, as that really helps my channel out and helps me to be discovered. So that about does it for this time. I will talk to you all in the next video. Roger and out.